What's up, ladies and gents? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Francisco. Let's talk about Final Fantasy VII Remake. This is the second video in my mini-series, Road to Rebirth, where we're going to be covering a recap of the story of Final Fantasy VII Remake while also discussing some theories as to what is potentially going on because of the fact that the story here has some pretty major changes compared to the original version of the game that we all know and love. In the first video, we covered the events of Final Fantasy VII Remake from the very beginning of the game up to the beginning of Mako Reactor number 5. And today in part 2, we're going to be covering Mako Reactor number 5 all the way to the start of the Wall Market segment of Final Fantasy VII Remake. There's a lot to discuss. There's a lot to digest here. So without further ado, let's get started. So we pick up with Cloud, Tifa, and Barrett arriving at Mako Reactor number 5. We make our way to the actual Mako storage facility room itself, and we start planting the bomb. As we're walking up to the reactor itself, you see another flashback that Cloud experiences here, okay? And going forward, whenever he has these little headaches, I'm just going to refer to them as migraines, okay? So he has under the migraine, and in this one, we see, some of the events that happened in Nibelheim, where Tifa is leaning over her dead father, I believe it is, and, basically saying that she's so sick of this, blah, blah, blah. They go ahead and plant the bomb, and this time around, they kind of learned a lesson from the first Mako reactor. Instead of putting the bomb on a timer, they brought themselves a remote detonator, right? So that this way, the three, Tifa, Barrett, and Cloud, can get safely away before blowing it the fuck up. But as we start walking away, things obviously aren't going according to plan now because it's very evident that the three are being watched. Heidegger shows up as a virtual projection of himself, and they have a conversation where he basically confirms that they've been working on turning the public's opinion against Avalanche, right? So Avalanche, their sole purpose and goal in doing this is to expose Shinra and the damage that they're doing to the planet by sucking up all of the Mako. Avalanche instead is using this to turn the public opinion against Avalanche, and we'll get into that here in just a moment. He makes some comments here stating that they're going to offer the people of Midgar the finest comfort.
And so, to a people beset by chaos and uncertainty, we will offer the finest comfort, bread and service.
And by this, he means that they're going to be showing the people a spectacle of Avalanche being brought to justice, right? I believe that they even were considering doing their execution live on broadcast TV. So the trio end up getting out of that conversation, and they make their way through the Mako reactor, basically aware that they're about to be fighting an experimental robot of Shinra's, the Airbuster. So along the way, we have the opportunity to start sabotaging some of its components so that the fight is a little bit more in our favor. One thing that I really enjoyed about this part of the game is that we start to see Cloud becoming more of a member of Avalanche and less of a merc for hire, to the point where they get in this elevator, they have a brief conversation, and, Barrett's kind of pep talking like, hey, we're going to make it through this. We're going to come out alive, and we're going to get back home, all three of us together. And, Cloud's like, and Tifa's like, yeah, and you better give Marlene a big smile. To which Cloud responds,
right?
You better give her a big old smile this time.
If the price is right.
I was like, yeah, well, if the price is right, but with like a smirk on his face, right? Kind of as a joke. So it's really nice to see, the three kind of start to get along, and Cloud being more a part of the team as opposed to just a mercenary for hire. Eventually, the three run into Shinra's president face to face, or rather face to projection. There's a projection of Shinra's president that meets with them and speaks to them and confronts them about their actions. And in this conversation, we learn some interesting things here, okay? So Shinra is aware of the ramifications, of the consequences of depleting the world of its Mako, of its life stream, right? Or life essence, if you will. But they don't see it as a problem. As a matter of fact, the president of Shinra goes as far to say that,
but for whose benefit, I wonder. The true nature of Mako is known to one and all, yet the people willfully turn a blind eye to the costs.
People are already aware of the consequences, but because of the benefit that and the gain that they get from this, they all kind of look away and turn a blind eye to the issues that this is causing the planet. President Shinra also goes on to make some comments that basically they are associating Avalanche as allies of Wutai, their most sworn enemy, all right? And Heidegger even steps in and makes a comment about how they, Avalanche, still don't understand their role in all of this. And at this point, I kind of want to step off here for just a moment and go off on a little bit of somewhat of a history lesson, okay? Just in case you're not privy to some of the events of the original game or the original lore. So Wutai and Shinra were at war. That was crazy. They were at war over Shinra's want to establish a Mako Reactor in Wutai. Wutai standing up to Shinra saying no. And by this point in the game's history or lore, in the original, that war had already been over with and Shinra had won. Okay. So I find it kind of peculiar if that war had already been won and over with in the original. And let's assume that the same can be said about the remake. If the war has already been over with, and it was already won here, then why would President Shinra, or Shinra for all intents and purposes, label Avalanche as allies of Wutai? And I think this kind of serves a couple of different potential purposes. They want to justify another war with Wutai. All right, there's plenty of references to soldiers being referred to as war heroes in this game already at this point. And to me, it didn't really signify anything until I started writing out like my outline for this video. But to me, initially, it meant that the war with Wutai had not happened yet, or has not happened yet in the Final Fantasy VII Remake timeline. But if that was the case, then what war would they be referring to when they refer to soldiers as former war heroes? So I think it's pretty safe to say that this war with Wutai has already happened. So if this isn't the case, then what I'm more inclined to think is that the war happened and now another war is going to happen for one reason or another. Even Heidegger steps in once again and makes a comment along the lines of,
"Don't you see? You fools were never in control. Never anything but pawns in our plans to sell great and glorious war to the people."
Selling glorious war to the people. So they're painting Avalanche as terrorists and as allies of Wutai to justify an upcoming future war with Wutai once again, which we could potentially see happen in the events that take place during Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Once this conversation's over, Barrett, Tifa, and Cloud go ahead and take on the Airbuster, which up until this point in the story in Final Fantasy VII Remake, it's like the best boss fight so far, right? Equal parts challenging and equal parts fun. And it can be a harder fight if you don't make some smart decisions along the way as you're, sabotaging and diverting some of the systems that were being sent out to the Airbuster in preparation for this fight. Once the fight is said and done with, the Mako Reactor number 5 explodes. The party are split up. Barrett and Tifa are on one ledge of the bridge, and Cloud is hanging by a thread on the opposite end of the bridge, of course, ultimately falling down beneath into the Sector 5 slums, if you will, but some interesting things happen here on the way down. As he's falling, we see Cloud being guided and surrounded kind of in a guiding manner by those same spirits that have been making sure the events of this game pan out as they are supposed to pan out, for lack of a better saying it. And then we find him in a bright white space. And this space to me represents something like purgatory, right? A place between life and death. In the original game, there is no purgatory scene, and Cloud survives his fall all the way down to Aerith's Cathedral. And we have a conversation here in Final Fantasy Remake that happens between Cloud and himself. And rather, what I actually believe here is that this is a different version of Cloud talking to the Remake's version of Cloud, urging him to kind of take care of himself. And he makes some comment about how they were able to get away with scraped knees back then. And in the original version, this conversation actually plays out practically the same, except you don't have any idea as to who is speaking to Cloud, and there's no sort of purgatory or white space that he's in. It's just a black screen with a text popping up. I'd imagine this as the original Cloud, or the original version of the game's Cloud, talking to our version of Cloud. I know it's going to get confusing here, but initially, I thought that was the case here, but then what happens here in the scene is that it goes from this white purgatory space into black, with now Sephiroth being next to Cloud. So Cloud is talking to Cloud. What we're going to call the other Cloud, the one shrouded in light, as the OG Cloud, right? So OG Cloud puts his hand on our Cloud's shoulder, and then a few seconds later, the whole space turns black, and now it's Sephiroth who's talking to Cloud, right?
Oh, Cloud, there's still so much to be done.
So that kind of did away with my initial thoughts that this was a different Cloud, or the original version's Cloud talking to our Cloud. And more so, I'm inclined to believe here that this just has to do with a lot of the mind games or mind fuckery that Sephiroth is playing at over here. Or maybe not. Because if we look closely, you don't really have to look that closely. You're going to see that when Cloud is talking to Cloud, the scenery is white, and when Cloud is talking to or being spoken to by Sephiroth, the scenery is black. And it's as if this Cloud, our Cloud, Final Fantasy VII Remake's Cloud, is going through some sort of an inner struggle or is being acted upon by both Cloud from the original game and Sephiroth from the original game. Either way, Cloud wakes up and he sees Aerith once more, the second time in Final Fantasy VII Remake, and we have an immediate instance of foreshadowing, aka Aerith's death once again. We get to have a nice little conversation with Aerith, and then of course Reno and his crew pop in and we have to fight him because he's in here to take her back over to Shinra. So another interesting thing that happens here compared to the original is that once we fight and beat Reno, there's a short cutscene that plays out where Cloud is about to kill him. All right, he is about to try and hit him with the finishing blow, and then the spirits immediately pop up and like whisk away both Cloud and Aerith away from Reno, thus saving Reno's life. Now I want to ask you a question. I want, please tell me what you think in the comments below. If Reno had been killed by Cloud right here and right now, would the Sector 7 slums have been destroyed? Because as we're going to see here in just a little bit, Reno and the Turks had a major playing hand in the destruction of the plate above Sector 7 that crashes down and destroys it. So if Reno gets killed here, does that then happen? And if that doesn't happen, then there's no motivation for Cloud and the gang to go to Shinra Tower and to, play out through the events that happen there that then lead to them, A, leaving Midgar in the original, and B, getting to the very end and conclusion of Final Fantasy VII Remake, which of course I'm not going to go into details right now because we still got a ways to go before we get to that point. And then imagine had none of that happened because Reno was killed at this point in time, what kind of implication, what kind of impact would that have had on how the rest of the events of this game transpire? Because remember, the spirit's purpose in this game right now is to ensure that the events of the story play out the way that they are supposed to play out per the original game's events. Now, the cool thing here is that the spirits, they're kind of a neutral party. Again, they're just here to make sure that the events play out the way they're supposed to. So they're not here trying to help out just the good guys or just the bad guys. They're just trying to make sure everything works and happens the way it's supposed to happen. So once we get whisked away by the spirits, Reno is safe, he's not killed. Then the spirits decide to go ahead and kind of help guide Aerith and Cloud out of the cathedral and to safety away from the Turks. So after leaving the cathedral, we make our way over to the Sector 5 slums. And as we're going to the Sector 5 slums, we see the arrival of a second Turk, this person here being Rude, which we'll talk about here in just a second. And so instead of wanting to confront another Turk, Aerith and Cloud opt to just go ahead and go through some back roads and get over to the Sector 5 slums. Once we arrive at the Sector 5 slums, we make our way over to Aerith's house. Of course, we're meeting some people on the way, getting a little bit more insight about Aerith's community service, if you will, to the Sector 5 people. And we meet with Aerith's mom. Now, this is kind of a big one, okay? So strap in. We meet with Aerith's mom, and Aerith makes a comment about how she can now go show Cloud the route to Sector 7. And Cloud gets a little upset. He's like, well, if you already knew the way to Sector 7, why in the world did I have to come all the way here with you? And Aerith responds to the effect of,
you'd be too embarrassed to admit it, and so you just keep on going.
Cloud's response, which is a very curious and interesting response, is stop acting like you know me. And I want to talk about that. You see, up to this point in Final Fantasy VII Remake, Cloud and Aerith had only met on 2 different occasions. The first one being during the bombing of Mako Reactor number 1, which is a very brief instance, and then now having fallen out of Mako Reactor number 5 all the way down into her cathedral. So in this short period of time, there is absolutely no fucking way Aerith knows Cloud well enough to know that he'd be too proud to admit that he was embarrassed that he got lost. And in my previous video, I had so many of y'all comment and kind of share your theories or trying to maybe even course correct me on some of mine, which I do appreciate. And if you want to continue to do the same, do it, because I see this series as an evolving series. This is a community series, right? I'm pitching y'all what I think is happening. You're going to put in your portion to it. And then by the end of it all, we're going to all come together and have a nice little package together here. So I had a viewer by the name of Evasive Dre 370. And he said something to the effect that at the start of the game, Aerith could have been watching the original events unfold before her, right? Because Aerith, at the end of Final Fantasy VII, the original version of the game, Aerith opens her eyes. You can see a snapshot, a short snippet, like a second of the end scene of Aerith's like upper body and her face, and she opens her eyes, right? And as she opens her eyes there, we, of course, this game, Final Fantasy VII Remake, opens up in the same exact fashion with Aerith kneeling down in his alley, presumably tapping into the live stream and then seeing her eyes open up. What if Aerith in the original game, because we're talking about projection, right? I'm thinking here that Sephiroth from the original game is projecting himself into this timeline. We can now say the same thing, or I can now say the same thing, that Cloud from the original game is also projecting himself into this timeline because he's also been touched by the live stream, if you will. And what's to say Aerith is not doing the same exact thing or didn't do the same exact thing? And Aerith here in Final Fantasy VII Remake, having tapped into the live stream, has seen the entirety of all the events from the original game pan up in front of her. And now she knows. She knows everything that has happened and now has a good idea of what could potentially happen in the events of Final Fantasy VII Remake, Rebirth, and whatever the third title is going to be called. And if this is the case, which I'm very inclined to believe, then she would know Cloud far more from the events of the original game, far more from knowing about the events of the original game than she would know about Cloud in the two occasions that they have spent time with each other in Final Fantasy VII Remake. But anyways, let's move on. After this conversation, we spent some significant amount of time in Sector 5 doing some odd jobs for the locals, just like we had done in the Sector 7 slums. Jesus Christ, I can get this right, y'all, I promise. I have it written here in front of me, and I still managed to butcher that somehow. So we do odd jobs for people in Sector 5, just like we had done odd jobs for the people in Sector 7. Of course, these just being side quests for the purposes of, I guess, getting to know the people, getting to know a little bit more about Aerith, and, I guess gameplay-wise, leveling up, grinding, getting some more equipment, and even unlocking some additional materia via Chadley's VR missions. At some point into the community service that we're doing with Sector 5 over here, we end up running back into Rude, but this time not from a distance, but up close and personal. He has tracked Aerith down, and he's here to take her away. But of course, Cloud's not going to let that shit happen. We step into the octagon. We fight it out. He beats the shit out of me. I beat the shit out of him. And then he gets a phone call at the very end of the boss fight where Reno calls him, telling him that he's got to come meet with him because there's something about a job at Sector 7 that they need to tend to. After that's said and done, Aerith and Cloud head back to her house. And Aerith, obviously with Cloud having to spend the night because they decided earlier that they would make their way to Sector 7 the following day, Aerith's mom asked her to please go upstairs and make up the guest room, get the guest room ready for Cloud's overnight stay. While she goes upstairs, Aerith's mom quickly tells Cloud, "Can I ask you to please leave? Don't ask any questions, no fuss, and I don't want you to talk to Aerith ever again." And of course, Cloud is obviously kind of shocked at this, but complies. Nothing too crazy, nothing too out of the ordinary. This is very much in line with what happened in the original version of the original game. And when Cloud goes upstairs to go lay down and wait for night to fall before he leaves, he has a bit of a flashback with himself at his house in Nibelheim with his mom in the kitchen, his mom praising him for being such a wonderful kid, a good soldier, and talking about the temptations in the big city and how he wants a good girl for Cloud that's going to take care of him, that is an older, more mature person than Cloud. And although I don't think there's any sort of major story significance here, what I did find in this conversation is that I think this conversation just serves the purpose of highlighting that Aerith is that. Everything that Cloud's mom wants for him in a girl or in a woman or in a partner is exactly what Aerith is. Aerith, to me, is someone who has cared for Cloud in a way in such a short, brief period of time that no one else has up until now. And I think Cloud is realizing that. After some failed attempts at sneaking out of the room and being thwarted by Aerith, I'm able to finally sneak my way out and take off and head over to Sector 7 all by my lonesome, leaving behind the would-be girl of my dreams, sorry, singular, just one, okay? Just one, y'all. Uno. But it doesn't really matter because a couple minutes into my journey, Aerith is already waiting for me and ready to catch me in the act of trying to sneak out without her, and proposes that she join me anyway because she is not sick of us yet. And Cloud gets another migraine. And this is a very brief migraine. There's no flashback scene associated with him, just the coloring distortion that happens on the scene and Cloud holding onto his head, the music, Aerith's music playing in the background, and a singular tear streaming down Cloud's face. First of all, absolutely touching scene, especially for anybody who's already played the original. You know what this means. It's very somber with the music playing in the background. You know, Aerith is such a sweet, loving, gentle, caring character. Like she's a fantastic character. I love her to death. I think she's fantastic. She does a lot to kind of complete the cast of characters in this game, and she's just marvelous. All right, and it was such a heartwarming, touching scene, such a sad scene too. You know, so again, Cloud has this migraine. He has a tear coming out of his face. And I think what's happening here is although this Cloud, our Cloud here in Final Fantasy VII Remake, doesn't necessarily know what's going to happen or what happened in the original version of the game, I think some of the dots are starting to connect, and his mind or his soul are starting to understand who Aerith is and what happened, and his body's just a little bit late in catching up, right? And so, you know, we go through a series of tunnels and some fighting and some like, you know, mechanical arm puzzles. And we end up making our way to the Sector 7 gate where, you know, we have like a little playground area for some children, you know, and Cloud's kind of in a rush. He wants to get back to Sector 7 as quickly as possible. Now, remember how I told you that I got some more for you as to why I am completely convinced that this Aerith knows of the events of the original game. So I noticed that in this segment of the game that we've been spending exclusively with Aerith, she's been very slow in the time that she spends with Cloud. She's not been in a rush. She has been kind of enjoying every single second of it. And it's been very nice to see. It's kind of a break from everything else, right? Where prior in the prior two Mako Reactor missions, it's kind of, you got to hurry up, you got to get the bomb, you got to put it down, you got to do this and that, you got to escape. This portion of the game, it's a very slower paced part of the game, and a lot more intentional with the amount of time that Aerith and Cloud are spending together. So she wants to go on top of the slide, all right? And Cloud's like, no, we got to go. I'm in a hurry. We got to get going. Let's just wrap it up. And she basically forces him to go up to the slide anyway. And again, she's just trying to enjoy every little bit of time that she gets with Cloud, right? And so they're on top of the slide. They have a conversation. And this is where Aerith starts asking Cloud about, you know, him being a soldier. Does he know some people in soldier? You know, she had a guy that the first person she ever fell in love with was a soldier. And Cloud's like, oh, what's his name? I might have known him. And here, she says Zach, but the crazy thing is that it does that color migraine distortion thing when she says it. There's no subtitle. All right, and I have subtitles turned on. There's no subtitle for it. And if you were to, you know, trust the lip syncing of a video game, then she definitely says Zach. I think so. And the moment she says the word Zach, Cloud has another migraine. What I find interesting about this conversation is the total lack of acknowledgement from Cloud to Aerith regarding her saying Zach's name. Now, some of us may or may not know this, but at this point in the game, at least in the original, and I'm going to assume the same for the remake version, Cloud has a personality disorder. He's literally suffering from split personality disorder, all right? He went through a series of traumatic events. You got to understand, Cloud is some little kid from a village out in the middle of nowhere who aspired to join Soldier, to be a great war hero like Sephiroth, failed in doing so, at least per the lore of the original game. He failed to become a soldier. He was asked to, you know, join a mission with Sephiroth and Zack over back to Nibelheim, and they asked Cloud to come along because, you know, they knew that he knew the area very well. And of course, all the events at Nibelheim unfold. His mom is killed. The city or the town at that point is, you know, set ablaze. And then, if that's not bad enough, Cloud is then also subjected to Hojo's experiments, where he's trying to basically, for lack of a better term, clone Sephiroth onto other people. And what ends up happening is Zack, also I think being part of this experiment, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I never played Crisis Core. Zack being also a part of this experiment ends up breaking out and escaping Hojo's experimental lab or whatever, and takes Cloud with him. Cloud, at this point in time during this escape, he's comatose. He's out for the count. He's not conscious, whatever it is. He's just not himself anymore. And I believe I recall seeing scenes of this happen in the original version of 7, or maybe just watching YouTube videos for however long ago this was, where Zack is telling Cloud stories of his life, his time as a soldier, and his own personal life. And all of that is what gets embedded into Cloud. And by the time that the events of Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core happen, Zack dies. Cloud is no longer himself, but instead he is Zack. Now, I don't mean that he's Zack in the same way that, you know, Revolver Ocelot was Liquid Snake because he attached Liquid Snakes to his arm. And I mean that the memories and everything that Zack shared with Cloud, because Cloud was, for lack of a better term, a blank slate at that time, that's what got embedded into Cloud. So Cloud has his personality disorder. He's got split personalities. And so when Aerith here says his name, Zack, it causes this migraine. And Zack and Cloud doesn't acknowledge Zack because up until this point in the game, in the original, and now I'm going to also assume here in the remake, Zack does not exist to Cloud. And to put it in a different way, Cloud is Zack, if that makes any sense. Anyways, this conversation wraps up, and at this point, the gate to Sector 7 opens up, and we see Tifa being carried away in a carriage, heading over to Wall Market. And at this point in the game is where the Wall Market segment will start, which, ladies and gentlemen, we will continue on the next part of the Road to Rebirth miniseries here for Final Fantasy VII Remake. Ladies and gents, I appreciate y'all so much. I'm so glad that many of you liked the very first video. I hope that y'all like this one just as much. Stay tuned. We will continue to discuss this. I'm so excited to get to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. If you have your pieces, your tidbits, anything that you want to share to contribute to my theories or your own theories, do so in the comments below. I read them. I check them, not like check them against, you know, facts or anything, but I check them out because that also kind of helps me understand things that I may have missed or misinterpreted. So I do appreciate all the comments. You'll have a wonderful evening. Be good to yourselves. Be good to one another. Peace out.
Oh, no, you don't. You're going after her.
She's a big girl. She can handle the likes of him. And worse.
You don't know Corneo. It doesn't matter how strong or smart you think you are. He'll find a way to turn it against you.